Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, learning a lot about America in these tumultuous times, both with the pandemic as well as the civil unrest, and from Joe Biden, who gives us a basic approximation about how many bad people there are in this country.
So when a president stands up and divides people all the time, you're going to get the worst of us to come out, the worst in us all to come out. This president constantly talks about equality without lecturing, talks about and has administrations that looks like the country and the rest. It changes attitudes. And it's about the attitude of the country. Do we want our kids, do we really think this is as good as we can be as a nation? I don't think the vast majority of people think that. There are probably anywhere from 10 to 15% of the people out there that are just not very good people. Wow. But that's not who we are. The vast majority of the people are decent. We have to appeal to that, and we have to unite people, bring them together. Bring them together.
Mr. Vice President, I have a follow-up. The 33 to 50 million people in this country who are not good people, could you identify them by groupings at minimum, if
Is
not
it
by
the new
names?
deplorables?
It's just something approximating that. Yeah, 10 to 15% of the nation, bad people.
33 million. Can I have a few examples, sir? Please.
Well, I mean, it's just quantifying it. What's the basis for that? I mean, as a man of science, I assume that he studied this issue and had a team of credentialed researchers look into
bad people.
Yeah, and what constitutes a bad person? What was the methodology? Was it published in The Lancet? Did it have to be retracted by the New England Journal of Medicine? I want to know all the answers. In addition to that pronouncement from Joe Biden this week, one of my other faves was from Fredo Cuomo, as cooler heads are prevailing and calling for others to follow suit, be a cooler head, do not commit acts of violence. Fredo Cuomo on CNN went the other direction.
Now, too many see the protests as the problem. No, the problem is what forced your fellow citizens to take to the streets. Persistent and poisonous inequities and injustice. And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Well,
show me where it says that protesters are supposed to be peaceful
and polite. We just want them to be nonviolent. And I am so sick of the mainstream media here in Chicago saying Monday night's protest at Broadway and Montrose was peaceful. It was anything but peaceful. People's stores got looted. People help themselves to ATMs and banks. I mean, come on.
Well, there's one thing for it to be misreported. There's another thing for Fredo Cuomo to say that protests don't have to be peaceful.
He's inciting violence. That's irresponsible.
Well, I mean, it's just the depths of the ignorance here. You know, you can have more than one problem occurring at the same time. I don't know if that was given any consideration. You can have the issue of the George Floyd case. You can have all sorts of other problems in a diverse country of 330 million people, and also recognize that people rioting is one of those problems. You can redefine violence all you want. You're not going to get majority support for the position that destroying somebody's business is okay when they've done nothing wrong. For more on fear and its use as a political weapon, pleased to be joined again by Frank Furedi. He is a professor emeritus of sociology at the University of Kent, across the pond in the UK, and author of How Fear Works, Culture of Fear in the 21st Century, as well as the forthcoming Why Borders Matter, Why Humanity Must Relearn the Art of Drawing Borders. Professor, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Glad here.
So it turns out that one of the oxymorons that is bandied about among the intelligentsia is the phrase safe spaces. Those spaces aren't very safe at all once you start to scratch below the surface a little bit. For example, when safe spaces are defined, as you write, as somewhere where no other humans are, as one University of Michigan epidemiologist described or defined a safe space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting because in a lot of universities and colleges in America, the reason why you have a safe space is basically to build a quarantine around yourself against being criticized. So if I question you, if I raise problems with you about your behavior or your ideas, that's not seen as so offensive that you must be insulated and protected from it. And I think what you've got is this very unhelpful ideal of safe space, which by definition implies that anything outside of that is inherently unsafe. And I think that kind of verbal gymnastic that's been brought in creates a situation where a lot of young people become extremely fragile and unable to handle the challenges of everyday life, and continually almost have this impulse of hiding behind something rather than facing up to the fact that the world we live in is not always very pleasant.
One of the other contradictions, in addition to the contradictions around the concept of safe space, is around the concept of non-judgmentalism. I'm non-judgmental. All positions are morally equivalent, except the ones I disagree with, and those positions are called violence.
Yeah, I think this is a very big problem. I mean, just on the verbal gymnastics around violence, I think it's very interesting that the same people in universities who call certain forms of speech violence, they say that if I criticize you, that's a form of verbal violence. The same people that condemn the use of strong words are also the same people that insist that the violence that exists on the streets of the United States is actually peaceful protest. So there's a kind of, that's not really violence. So you got this kind of real double standard. You know, my criticism of you is violent speech, but if somebody actually loots a shop or burns a building down, that's not seen as being violent. That's given a different kind of a name. And I think when we have this kind of Orwellian language that is being used, then it is not surprising that we end up with the kind of major political problems that we have, where we simply cannot talk to each other because all sides seem to speak a very different language.
You write in your piece too about fear and the quest for personal safety, and you make an important point that I'd like you to develop as as an academic in the field of sociology. The idea that it's not just external threats, the fear or the quest for personal safety is not just with respect to external threats. It's also with respect to internal turmoil. And I think that starts to get to some of what you talk about in your book, How Fear Works. So could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I think one of the things we're seeing is that we live in a world where we've been encouraged to look inwards all the time, where we tend to define the problems of everyday life as almost like psychological or mental health problems, where we tend to have such an obsessive attitude towards our existence that we become very insecure as people. We kind of continually have this inner tension within us, a feeling of insecurity. We don't know why, but we just feel very insecure. And I think as a result of that, we tend to have adopt practices that are extremely risk-averse, that continually attempt to prevent us from coming into contact with anything that's a little bit uncertain. And because of that, our fears acquire this very powerful sort of force that can easily detach itself from any particular threat, but can have this free-floating character that one day, we're worried about our weight, next day we're worried about the food that we eat, the day after we're worried about the fact that, there are strangers in our area that might harm our children. And every single day there's an amplification of different kinds of fears, which we are not really based on anything specific, but are the external expressions of our internal psychological upheavals, which is what our culture at the moment tends to encourage and foster.
But who's stoking that fear? Is it our government officials? Is it the media? Is it a combination of both?
I think that it's at its bottom. It's the kind of cultural ideals that are sort of in circulation. I think as a university professor professor, as somebody who's very familiar with the education system, we know that we bring children up in such a way that we encourage them to think about their fragility. We tell children that they lack their mental health problems, they're going to be stressed out. We tell children that they will never be criticized because criticizing them is a form of violence. And when these children who have been psychologically affirmed month after month, year after year, go outside into the real world, never having sort of been tested and encouraged to take risks, then it's very easy for them to acquire these kind of psychological sort of vulnerabilities and to perceive themselves to their sense of powerlessness rather than the fact that they got the potential to take matters into their own hand and they have a capacity for responsible and independent behavior.
A 2018 study published in the Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery analyzed more than 114,000 criminal arrests made across 3 mid-sized police departments in America, finding that more than 99% of arrests were carried out without the use of physical force. In 98% of the cases in which officers did use physical force, which represented, again, 1% of the overall cases, 98% of those cases, suspects sustained no or mild injury. Why doesn't research or data, when you are conversing about the issue of police brutality, police misconduct, when you are conversing about the lethality of a virus like COVID-19, why can it not penetrate the consciousness of many?
I think it's a very good question. I often wonder why it is that we have this inflated idea of dangers and threats that are often unrelated to reality. And these days, all you really need is just one person dying of COVID in kind of very graphic terms for us to believe that our way of life is going to become destroyed. And all we need to see is one instance of a heavy-handed policeman, sort of pushing people around to imagine that the police, this is the normal way that the police tend to kind of behave. And I think that in this interconnected world that we live in, where we're always expected and encouraged to fear the worst, and this kind of worst-case thinking is very powerful. Every time I watch something on Netflix, it kind of comes across with full force. It does lead to a situation where the reality, as you described it, becomes distorted, and we just simply don't see what's in front of our eyes.
He is Frank Furedi, Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Kent in England, author of How Fear Works, Culture of Fear in the 21st Century, which is excellent. I've read that. And the forthcoming Why Borders Matter, Why Humanity Must Relearn the Art of Drawing Borders, and I look forward to reading that. Professor Furedi, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
After 25 years of building websites for all kinds of companies in many different industries, AmericanEagle.com realized a well-designed website is also your best employee, bringing efficiency, revenue, production, showing up every day, giving above and beyond to increase your bottom line. That's what a website designed, developed, and hosted by AmericanEagle.com has brought to so many clients. An AmericanEagle.com website is a 24/7 branding exercise, building rapport and thus brand equity while you sleep. Companies like WeatherTech have relied on AmericanEagle.com's website design and development and hosting capabilities for years. When some of the world's top brands need a reliable company to prepare their sites for high-traffic events, who do they call? AmericanEagle.com. Their clients have come to rely on them for a full line of website services, from consulting and strategy to digital marketing, hosting,